Title: Thrones of Green. In the lush realm of the Gardenlands, power is the currency of survival. The roses, with their blood-red petals and thorny defenses, reign over the central beds, ruling with beauty and terror. But whispers of rebellion grow in the shadows. Cut to the weeds camp, overgrown and wild. For too long, we've been trampled under petal and root. The time has come for the weeds to rise. We shall spread without mercy, choking every noble stem that stands in our path. Cut to the Sunflower Citadel. Tall, Sunflower King. The light belongs to us, for we turn our faces to the sun and bask in its glory. Let the roses keep their thorns. The Gardenlands shall bow to those who stand tallest. Scene shift to the Poison Ivy Enclave, lurking in the shadows. Poison Ivy Queen, while they battle for the light, we shall creep, silent and unseen. One touch, and they'll all wither. Their downfall will be our rise. As petals fall and roots entwine, alliances will shatter, and the soil will run green with envy. In this war of thrones, only the most cunning, the most ruthless will rule the Gardenlands. Winter may never come, but darkness will.
Wow. That was a ChatGPT rendition of Game of Thrones, Ecological Succession style. So here we are, 2.7. We are talking about ecological succession. Ecological succession is the well-defined pattern of process where a biological community changes over time and alters the environment. So what normally happens is we have an event. There's an event that occurs, whether that's a fire, a flood, a volcano eruption, whatever, and it kind of destroys all the ecosystem that was there before. And this ecological succession is the process that goes from barren all the way to completely stable, where one group is outcompeting the next group, outcompeting the next group, and outcompeting the next group until we eventually get to our climax community over here. But it is the process by which that happens from the start to the finish. Now we have two types of succession that we're going to focus on here, primary and secondary. Primary is when we go from a point when there was no previous life. We're talking no soil, most importantly, so lava flows, sand dunes, retreating glaciers. We've got bare rock. That's it. This process is very, very long. It's going to take could be hundreds of thousands of years for that process because we have no soil. We have to create that soil in order for anything to establish. While secondary is much faster. This is an area where there was life before, and most importantly, there was soil. It was there before, but the community is no longer there. So for example, forest fire, lake was filled, trees have fallen down to make a clearing. So we're taking an area that did have a community before, does not anymore, and now we're going to succeed it again. Now, most importantly, both types of succession start with these pioneer species. So there are first species that are going to go in. So they're going to take an area that looks like this here and eventually turn it over to that. It requires soils. And so these grasses that have developed all along this rock can slowly break it down and create the soil that these trees are going to need. Like as I mentioned before, it could take thousands of years to go from this to that. Now, lucky for us, these pioneer species do not require soil, or they just need little tiny bits. Most of the time, I know you've seen this before on rocks. Whenever we have bare rock, it is our lichens. Our lichens are the things that are going to be those pioneer species. It's an interesting combination here. This is a symbiotic relationship between our fungus and an algae. The fungus is able to attach to the rock. where the algae is what we see growing right here. And that algae is what is going to take sunlight, use photosynthesis, create the energy that the fungus is then going to eat off of. So it's this nice little symbiotic relationship. And what happens is over time, they start to build organic compounds. And then when they die, they fill these little bits of rock with the nutrients and the organic compounds that are needed for larger plants to start growing. All right, so here's our entire stages of primary succession. We are starting with bare rock, nothing at all. Then our lichens move in, and our lichens are going to start creating that soil for us. So important. And then that soil is going to give us small annual plants and more lichens. Annual plants are ones that they grow every year, they die every year. They grow back every year, they die every year. So they can be supported by very little soil. And then this group is going to outcompete the other group. As you can see, it's a little bit taller. So it's going to outcompete this group. So this group can no longer survive. And now it, by dying and reproducing, is going to build more and more and more soil and help break down all this rock. Then by more chemical and physical processes, look at this, our soil's getting deeper and deeper and deeper. This group is going to outcompete this group here. And then our climax group to the end is going to outcompete that group. When we hit our climax end, that means we are finished. So we are finished changing. That's most important. So when we get to our climax community, that means the process is done. No more changing, but this whole process could have taken 100,000 years. Secondary succession is much faster. This is very, very fast. If you notice, this is only going to take us maybe 150 years maximum. But the same thing is going to happen. We're going to start with our annual plants that don't need a lot of soil. And then we're going to get into our grasses and our perennials. These are going to outcompete the other. Our grasses, our shrubs, these are now taller. So they're going to block the light of these guys. They're going to outcompete. And then our climax community is coming in and completely blocking out the light of that other group. So the whole competition here is for light, much faster, because that soil is already there. As I mentioned before, as we start getting deeper and richer soil, we can get taller plants. And then those taller plants are going to block out the light, leaving our shorter plants in the shade. And then eventually we're going to get to this climax community. And that is the end of our succession. Just important points to highlight here. And I don't want to forget, this could be a tundra, this could be a savanna, this could be a rainforest, this could be an estuary. This is just an example of how this could look in a pond. Often we find that ponds can be filled in. And again, we need that soil. When we have that soil, then taller plants can grow from there. So you can see over time, we're filling up with more soil. The more soil we have, the taller the plants that can grow. They're going to outcompete their previous species. And oh, there we go. Pond's getting smaller, a lot more soil, bigger plants. Okay, now we have no pond. We've got enough nutrients for a tree. And now we have all these trees. We've reached our climax community. Our climax community that is established, it depends on the biome. That's so important. Even though in these pictures we're showing large trees, that's not always the case. In the Arctic, for example, that would be a tundra. This is it. This is our climax community. We're thrilled. We have flowers and all these different plant species. This is it. So it doesn't have to be this grandiose trees that exist. It very much depends on that biome. And then just a reminder that although we are talking about the succession in terms of plant species, we also have to remind ourselves that it also involves a whole community of organisms, including your animal species. As we know, the more plants that grow, the more animals that can be supported by those plants because of that primary production and so on. And as I mentioned before, our ecological succession is often described in terms of terrestrial communities. And that, again, that is not always the case. This can happen in marine communities. We could have a shipwreck that happens. We could have new areas where we've got magma coming up. So we can have these same primary and secondary succession patterns happen in marine communities as well. As I mentioned before, the shipwreck above, we would start with our green algae. It's going to attach to the surface. The algae coral will lead to soft coral, which will then lead to shrimp and small fish, which will then lead to larger fish, and then that will lead to hard coral. So when we get to our climax community, that's our hard corals. And same thing, each of these are out competing the previous one. So it's the same idea. All right, some very important terms for you: pioneer species, intermediate species, climax community, biomass again, species richness. We should know these already, but these are new. So we're gonna make sure you get those down. All right, thanks guys.